Hello everyone. What I'm about to say completely blows my mind. And for it to even be a possibility is even crazier in my mind. And that is, last week was the last week at my real job. Say what? You quit your job? Thanks to everyone who has supported me over these years and given me inspiration over my journey of turning my hobby and side hustle into what is now my full-time job. I simply cannot believe that I'm getting the chance to turn my hobby into a full-time job and making my passion of breeding shrimp and natural planted aquariums into my full-time life's work. It truly, totally blows my mind. In this video, I first want to thank everyone, talk about the purpose of what I do, and how I came to be a shrimp breeder, a bit about my history and the hobby of keeping fish and shrimp, and some of my plans for the future at Mark Shelly Aquatics YouTube channel and my website, markshellyaquatics.com. So here are all the thank yous. So many people to thank. I truly have been blessed to be able to even have the opportunity to give this breeding shrimp for profit thing a full go. The number one person I have to thank is my wife, Brandy. She has been my life partner for over 21 years now. We have seen the best of times and we've seen the worst of times. She's always been there to support me through it all. Then there are all you guys out there watching my videos and the hundreds of customers I've had in the last year and a half since launching my website, markshellyaquatics.com. There are many of you guys who have been with me watching and commenting on my videos for 5 years now at this point. Clearly, without you guys, none of this would ever be possible. Throughout this crazy and fun journey, I have made many new friends, and even some of you guys I consider my best friends. I have made, through the course of doing tanks and making YouTube videos, pretty crazy. Some of my best friends I've made since starting YouTube. Now, I gotta thank some people for being the inspiration for me to even get started doing this. I've always had tanks and ponds going back to being just an 8-year-old kid. But about maybe 6 years ago or so, I started getting into YouTube fish community watching videos. I remember Aquarium Co-op having a series of videos called Breeding for Profit. At the time, I was hating life because of a job I was completely miserable with, and I remember thinking, man, this is pretty cool. I always had tanks, but just as a hobby, never really thought of the possibility of them ever even making money. Corey's video series about breeding for profit, combined with my pure and utter hatred of the job I had back then, put a thought in the back of my head that, wow, if I could ever pull it off to make my living full-time off my aquarium hobby, that would be the coolest thing ever. So I guess you could say all those years ago, Corey from Aquarium Co-op planted that seed in my brain. Next, from an inspirational standpoint, I'd like to thank Lucas Bretz at LRB Aquatics. I had 1 or 2 natural planted aquariums going at all times that back then were guppy tanks. I realized that once established, these natural planted tanks were very hands-off and easy to maintain once you have a working formula. I seen how Lucas had literally hundreds of natural planted tanks and thought, wow, I could probably do this. Also got my first shrimp ever from Lucas over 5 years ago. My reds in my first ever shrimp purchase. To think it all started with 10 red shrimp over 5 years ago, it completely, totally blows my mind. The next person and YouTuber I'd like to thank who has had the most recent and biggest impact on making this possible is Mark from Mark Shrimp Tanks. I'd been watching Mark for years and seen he had a whole room full of tanks dedicated to just keeping shrimp. So that helped get the gears in my head turning as well. This last winter, I was laid off from my job for 3 months. It is the first time since starting all these tanks that I was not using up the biggest portion of my time, and my life for that matter, working for a paycheck. I was making lots of videos, but they're still the same kind of videos that I've been making for years, getting, not really that good, getting me 200 or 300 views. During this time, Mark started commenting on my videos, and I was like, oh wow, this is pretty cool to have one of the big shrimp YouTubers appreciate my videos. Mark then started giving me shout outs on his community tab and even a couple mentions in his videos. I started getting a tiny bit of traction with the YouTube algorithm, and this is what inspired me to start playing the YouTube game and make better videos. I started doing lots of YouTube creator education stuff, as before it was just point, shoot, and upload whatever was on my mind. Back then, for years, a 10-minute video took 10 minutes to make. Now that 10-minute video might take me all day to make and put together. Started to scratch the surface of the inner workings of YouTube and invested into some tools to help me in that aspect as well. With Mark's shoutouts giving me some traction and inspiring me to better figure out YouTube, the views on my videos increased 5 to 20 times. My subscriber count began to climb. That's about the time I started making more selling shrimp and plants than I did at my job. Then they called me back to work just as things were really starting to take off. I did my best to keep up. Work was slow when I first went back, but it was still super tough, but I was managing it, and my sales kept climbing and climbing. Then the busy season hit at my work, working sun up to sundown, and I just was not able to keep up with YouTube, which is where 95% of my promotion comes from. Then Mark, from Mark Shrimp Tanks, makes a whole video that is a shout out to me. I was amazed and so thankful he did that for me. Even though I was not able to keep up the pace with the videos, that shout out from Mark kept the almost record-setting pace of sales going, even though I had no time to do proper videos because of work. That was when I really got to thinking, my time is going to be much better spent doing my own thing instead of dedicating over half my life working for a paycheck, making someone else money. So Mark from Mark Shrimp Tanks, I cannot thank you enough. Not sure you realize the impact the hand up you gave me has had on my life. Thank you again. I really cannot thank everyone enough who has played a part in Mark Shelly Aquatics, whether it be watching my videos, buying my shrimp and plants, or just being an influence and inspiration. None of it would be possible without each and every single one of you, and my heart is truly, totally filled with gratitude. So now that we've got the thanks and stuff out of the way, I'm going to do a little bit about this video, about a part of in this video that's about me. The purpose and goal of Mark Shelly Aquatics. Keeping and breeding shrimp has seriously been one of the best things that has ever happened to me. The peace and stress relief that a natural planted shrimp tank has come to give me cannot be underestimated. Like everyone, the stresses of life can get to me. Anger issues, other anxieties have gotten the best of me at times over the years. And I've always found great pleasure and relief in these little glass boxes full of plants and critters. I look at it as an escape from all the bad stuff going on in the world or even in my own head. Just to sit there and stare off into this little natural world that you have created might be one of the most rewarding feelings I've ever had. Over the course of the last 20 years or so, I have discovered a pretty easy to replicate formula for the basic natural planted tank. Then a little over 5 years ago, I discovered that the ideal environment for NEOCARIDINA shrimp are these little natural aquatic wonderlands that I've been creating in my guppy tanks for years. I know firsthand just how rewarding keeping shrimp can be many, many times over with all the tanks I have now. Just like anything in life, having success with something makes it that much more enjoyable. Let's face it, having a tank full of dead shrimp really would not be all that fun. So I am sharing my experiences and my simple recipes for success. I get emails, comments, and messages regularly thanking me for helping them get successful shrimp tanks going, and that right there is why I got into this. I truly feel like helping people enjoy this wonderful hobby with simple, easy to understand advice is my calling. Never have I done anything so rewarding as helping people have success at shrimp keeping. When it comes to shrimp, let's face it, over 90% of shrimp that are available today they're really pretty crappy. Most are nothing more than diseased, riddled, imported sick creatures that are on death's door when you get them. Even if you get healthy, nice looking shrimp, there stands to be a good chance that when they breed out, the babies are going to be of way less quality than what you started out with due to the nature of how imported shrimp are raised and their genetic background. Back when I was getting into shrimp, there seemed to be a much bigger community of hobbyists selling shrimp to other hobbyists. Now, due to the huge influx of imported shrimp and shrimp becoming more mainstream and less of a niche like it used to be, it has become harder and harder for your normal hobbyist to make a serious go at breeding shrimp. Many shrimp importers are bringing in thousands of shrimp for pennies per shrimp and hope to get enough to live and are good enough to sell for $5 a pop so they can make their profits. It just seems to me that being able to find good healthy shrimp that don't suck is getting harder and harder. So my goal has always been to provide high quality healthy shrimp to people who know that there is better out there, and to inform people out there that there is better out there. Many people don't even realize there are better shrimp out there, and so I'm here to tell them about it, and I got them to offer. So basically, in a nutshell, my first goal is educational videos showing people how I successfully keep shrimp and helping people have success the easiest way possible. That's my #1 goal to everyone worldwide. However, I can only ship to people in the US, which is less than half of my overall YouTube traffic. But to offer high quality homebred shrimp, at least the folks in the US anyway. I honestly do believe when you combine quality and the health of my shrimp, they are pretty hard to beat. So, let's dive into the history of my tank keeping history. The tank's how I got started off in this hobby. Growing up, my parents always had a 20-gallon tank that ever since I can remember, I was completely fascinated with. By the time I was around 8 years old, I was begging for my very own fish tank in my bedroom. Eventually, my parents got me my own setup, a 10-gallon tank with feeder guppies. I would spend hours upon hours watching my tank when I was just a little guy. Then as I got older into my teens, I had my first rack. A 20-gallon with a 10-gallon below it in my bedroom as a young teen. I remember riding my bike to the fish store to spend every penny burning a hole in my pocket on my fish tanks. By the time my teenage years were over, I had a 40-gallon long, a 20-gallon, and a 10-gallon all crammed into my little bedroom at my parents' house growing up. Keep in mind, I'm old. So this goes all the way back to the 80s and 90s, back before the days of the internet. All I had to go by was what the old guy at the fish store told me. It was better than nothing, but I was still pretty much just keeping fish in a tank and hoping for the best. Then in the late 90s and early 2000s, I was out on my own with more room for fish tanks and eventually my own backyard to start digging ponds in. In my 20s, I was into big, aggressive American cichlids and had a couple of African cichlid tanks even. Still to this day, I say my most favorite fish I ever owned are sevrums. This is also when I started getting into planet tanks. So while I was breeding sevrums in a 75-gallon tank, I also had a couple high-tech planet tanks back then. And this is back in the early 2000s. Then started my obsession with goldfish ponds and pond plants. I was on that kick for probably close to 15 years. I became obsessed with keeping goldfish outside my ponds year-round. Everything was done on a shoestring budget as I was raising 3 young kids. This is how I picked up on the DIY part of the hobby. I couldn't afford thousands of dollars of expensive pond equipment, so I'd save up, buy a nice big powerful pump, and literally every single other part of my ponds back then were DIY. I feel like I learned so much during the years of keeping my ponds. Everything else seems pretty easy compared to being outside in a blizzard when it's -20 outside and trying to do whatever it took to keep my horde of outside goldfish alive. One of the ponds I started with a dozen goldfish and ended up with hundreds. Making lots of goldfish was lots of fun. During all those pond years, I always had at least 1, sometimes 2 natural planted tanks going full of guppies, oftentimes having what seemed like more plants and water in those tanks at times. This is when I really figured out just how easy and hands-off a natural planted tank can be. It was always just purely as a hobby. Then I saw aquarium co-ops breeding fish for profit, and LRB with his hundreds of natural planted tanks. The same kind of tanks I had been keeping for years, only he had hundreds, not two. I realized how hands-off my couple of tanks were and thought to myself, I think that is doable. At this point, about 6 years ago, I never even owned a shrimp or even knew what a NEOCARIDINA shrimp was. I knew guppies and figured I wanted to go crazy with guppies and endlers. Even set aside a couple of tanks back then to give these shrimp a try 5 years ago. And here I am now, 5 years later. As far as my future plans go, right now I'm just trying to expand. More and more tanks to raise shrimp in. I have many people asking me why I don't do Caridina shrimp and only work with Neos. I feel like having mastered the simple basics of NEOCARIDINA and getting them to breed prolifically opens me up to being able to dive way deeper into cherry shrimp than almost anyone, and probably deeper than most people would ever care to go. My wife says I'm over the top detail oriented, meaning I take something simple and dive as deep as I can go. Right now, I know I still have so much more to learn about cherry shrimp that it just doesn't bore me in the least. I'm always on the quest to learn more and more about the common cherry shrimp and hope to take them to levels not seen before now that this has become my life's work. I saw just how far I came in the 3 months I was laid off from work this winter. I'm super excited to see where all this takes me, that I'm dedicating myself fully and completely to breeding more and better shrimp, along with getting better and better at YouTube. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.